Good evening. On behalf of UAF Summer Sessions and Lifelong Learning, I would like to welcome those of you in the room as well as those watching via live stream to this evening's Discover Alaska lecture. At UAF, we acknowledge the Alaska Native Nations upon whose ancestral lands our campuses reside. In Fairbanks, our Trop Yeda campus is located on the ancestral lands of the Dene people of the Lower Tanana River. Da-ka-xeen Mehner is a transdisciplinary artist whose work explores indigenous identity and equity and examines power structures through a lens of personal narratives. His work has been exhibited internationally and can be found in numerous public and private collections. From 1994 to 2000, Mehner served as the founder and director of Site 2121, a contemporary art gallery in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Da-ka-xeen returned to Alaska in 2000 and earned his MFA in Native Arts from the University of Alaska Fairbanks in 2007. Mehner has been recognized for his work with several fellowships, including the Rasmussen Foundation Fellowship, Native Arts and Cultural Fellowship, Idle George Contemporary Art Fellowship, and the United States Artist Fellowship 2015. Mehner's home studio is located in the vast boreal forest outside Fairbanks, Alaska, where he lives with his family. He is currently the director of the Native Arts Center and the chair of the art department at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Please join me in welcoming Da-ka-xeen Mehner.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And thanks everyone for coming out today on such a beautiful day today. So I think we'll jump right into the images. And we'll just do my introductions as we go through. Just going to test here. All right, looks like everything's working. Gunashish, thank you for having me. My name is Da-ka-xeen Mehner. I am Daklawedi, Keet Gushi Hit. And I'm just going to talk tonight a little bit about my process as an artist, my inspirations, things that have gotten me to where I am today, and take you along some of the journey that I've had as an artist as we go through. So I grew up here in Fairbanks, hometown boy, and grew up in this small cabin on Happy Road. So I know how long you've been in town if you know it by Happy Road or the other name. And we grew up in this house, in this cabin with no running water, no electricity, no internet, no phones. And we did our bathing on the sauna there, and you can see my mother's design there. So, I've always culturally identified myself as hippie from my father's upbringing and Tlingit on my mother's side. So those are my cultural influences, and I guess a lot of the talk is about how I've navigated those cultural influences and what they mean within my artwork. And so nobody's impressed by a picture like this, but anytime I'm outside of Alaska and show a picture of this much snow, everybody's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. So coming from Alaska, a lot of times people think of, this vast horizon that we live in and these beautiful spaces that we live in. But part of my upbringing was also being part of a blue-collar family, and I followed my father into Local 942 while I was going through school and went through and so worked construction as I went myself through school. And these were some of the images of those times, and I think there's a good acknowledgement on when we think about the landscape in Alaska, and quite often it's glorified in the untouched portions of it. And this was on the Prudhoe Bay oil fields. We were redoing the Anchorage or the airport there at the time. It was a 2-year project and did a couple of years up there. But this kind of landscape also influenced quite a bit of what I was doing. This is not particularly a good piece of artwork. It was taken, I did it when I was 18, but it's a piece that maybe was my first piece that I started looking at my work and myself in relationship to culture. So it's a self-portrait, a drawing, and then the drawing was cut up like shattered glass and falling in the back. And behind the drawing was a painting of a Tlingit mask. Like I said, it's not a great piece of artwork, but I do like starting with it as a way to start showing what's going on or thinking about processes. So I left Alaska, went to art school in Santa Fe, New Mexico, at at the Institute of American Indian Arts. And when I was there, I found a number of like-minded artists, and it was a place where I guess I was introduced to Alaska or native cultures from around Alaska or around the U.S. It was a dedicated art school, but there were artists from all over the United States and Canada that were going there. And without knowing what an installation was, a bunch of my buddies or a bunch of our friends there, we all stayed up late at night, worked in the studios, decided to do this installation, transform a space, and we took over one of the studio spaces there, and over a weekend filled it with dirt, put in false doors, put in this altarpiece in there. And it was really this kind of an examination on organized religion upon indigenous cultures in the U.S. But really, probably have to give credit to one of my partners there, John McConville, who had just finished 12 years of Catholic school before coming to IIA, so maybe it was more of his journey than mine at this point. It was interesting. Last summer, I got an opportunity to visit with John McConville in his home community in Idaho, and this mosaic is implanted in his kitchen in his home. And it's like, I have that picture in my slideshow. I show it every year. Yeah. So I went to the the Institute of American Indian Arts. It was only a 2-year school at that time, so I got my associate's degree there. And then I went to the California College of Arts and Crafts in Oakland. I guess it was a very different kind of experience there. These were some of the pieces that I was starting to work with or started putting together while I was there. Really was kind of looking at I guess these cultural influences that I have within my life and trying to find my place within those areas. And so it's a triptych with a portrait of my mother on one side, a portrait of my father on the other side, and then a portrait of myself in the center. And I was using, just kind of raw 2x4 materials. I was kind of using the visual vocabulary of construction for my work at that point. I was only at the Institute, or I was only in California for 1 year. It was a great education, it really was, but the city was a strange experience for me. I don't know, it was a place of being with millions of people. It was the loneliest place I'd ever been. Now nobody looks at each other on the streets because everybody's looking at their phone. But back then, coming from Alaska, it was strange not to have anybody acknowledge you. The people in the cities, they don't make eye contact. It's like you're invisible as you're walking through these spaces. And so I was kind of looking at this experience of being surrounded by humanity, but being incredibly alone. And at the time, swaying back and forth with some friends, John McConville, one of them, he went to the Chicago Art Institute. We were talking about how much we missed living in the desert and having these spaces. So we both ended up moving back to Alaska, or to New Mexico. I enrolled into UNM, the University of New Mexico, which I eventually got my BFA at. And this was the first group of work I had done kind of coming out of the city experience. And so it was a series of towers, which definitely has this influence of living in a place that has big towers, and never had that experience before. And then also created a number of industrial nests. So each one of these are metal fabricated pieces that held one single egg. And it's just a strange experience of being stacked on top of people everywhere, but still separated. Just a non-connection to anyone. So, a couple of pieces. Oops. Through them. So another one of the tower pieces I was exploring at that time. At the same time, I started looking or thinking about some of the mythologies, that I grew up with, namely Raven, and was thinking about Raven as this character, as this mythological being that is the trickster, and he's the creator of everything, right? But he does it for his own selfish wants and desires. And he tried to steal the moon, but dropped it, so we have the moon. He tried to steal the stars and the sun, but he dropped it, so we have daylight. And as an artist, I guess I always appreciated that idea of being a trickster, of being a character that works out just on the edges of society, or having latitude, kind of doing whatever I wanted at the time. This is also a time where I started the gallery in Albuquerque. We just noticed there were a number of nonprofit institutions that closed down. We were living in a warehouse. We thought, right, we can open a gallery, and so we put up a couple walls and have this gallery space in there. And so I was trying to go to school, run this gallery, and do this work there. So the clicker's a little off. I had a very odd art accident in posing for a set of photographs. They caught on fire. Ended up with third-degree burns on both shoulders, second-degree burns on my back. Did a week of intensive care, 2 skin grafts. And so this was the piece that came out of it. And now, something a little bit about the piece, it has my emulating of Raven there, but then also is me pictured with my clan, the Da-ka-xeen or the killer whale being represented. And when you start looking at or thinking about the clan structures within the Tlingit, they're all held under 2 moieties, one eagle and one raven. And killer whale moiety is held under the raven moiety. So this was the life lesson that killer whales should not pretend to be ravens. So, a little bit of healing. I was invited to participate in the post-apocalyptic tool exhibition in Santa Fe, and so I thought, as in the post-apocalypse, we want to communicate with the creator, and so I'm still working with kind of themes of Raven, but rather than emulating Raven, it was about trying to communicate. So this was the transmitter to the gods piece. It's also something I recognize as my first mask piece that I'd ever done, because I thought at the end of after the apocalypse, we'd all have questions for the creator. So that was my tool I was looking for in that piece. A number of years passed. Decided to move back up to Alaska, came back up here. And at the time, it was really, we ran a gallery, did artist spaces, did shows all over the place. We did events with downtown arts organizations. But, it was hard to make a living, and I knew up here I could always go back to my construction roots and make some money, and so that's what I did. I closed up shop with a gallery, climbed in my Toyota pickup and drove up here, back up to Alaska, and fortunately my wife, Organic, got a job here at the university, and she said, do you know there's a Native Arts program here at the university? And I was like, I have no idea. Like, I grew up here and had no idea there was a Native Arts program that was started in 1965 by Robinson Mothertuck. And I was like, how could I have grown up in this place and not know about this institution? And so, I took a class here or there, the construction, you got in Alaska, you work until it snows and freezes up, you get laid off, and you get some time on your hands. So jumped in, took a class with Alvin Amison, who was the director of the Native Arts Center at the time, and decided to jump into the program. And so joined the MFA program here at UAF. I guess as artists, we're always looking and searching, researching, and came across this text of a description of a photograph that was phonetically the same as my name, Da-ka-xeen or Da-ka-xeen. And it was the Smithsonian, it was identified in the Smithsonian, and I was like, I'm gonna see what this is, I'm gonna rate them, and get a disc in the mail, because that's the only way they could send images back then. You could do it through the internet. Loaded up this disc and found this man, and made a little print in my studio, put it up, and was starting to look at it. And so the images are part of the Case and Draper files. They had a photo business in Juneau, Alaska in the 1900s. And had numerous images of Juneau, but also a number of images of Native people. And as I started going through their archives, which are held in the State Museum down in Juneau, I found this man over and over again identified as different people, and I was starting to wonder about these constructed images that were being portrayed at the time, and created this piece. There's all these cultural mismatches that are happening within the image itself, right? There's the killer whale hat, the raven rattle, looks like a totems or a souvenir totem at the time, a frog hat, what looks like could be a shaman's grave marker, kind of all put together. And really the image is about, or this man is really just a prop within the image, right? So he was just brought in. And in this image, he's identified as Da-ka-xeen, the Tlingit shaman, and our names, Da-ka-xeen, are part of the clan structure, part of our atu. Roy Brown was the last caretaker of the name. I'm the current caretaker of the name, but it's part of the clan's atu, and it's passed down from generation to generation. And I could definitely see how this was a phonetic version of that one. And so made this series of images, but always playing my own little tricks of putting in my camera or the tools that I use, changing up the text on there, in there, and was invited into an exhibition at the University of Davis celebrating visual sovereignty. And I was like, I don't know that term, and then looked it up and had to read it about it, and I was like, I guess I'm doing visual sovereignty now. And it was a great exhibition, number of artists from all over the US, great time there. So I have this birthmark. My goatee comes in gray on one side, always has. Kept it clean shaven for years and years because I was kind of self-conscious about it. But it was, something that had maybe some friendly competitions with people that might be in the room on how far they could go with their goatee. And, but every year or two I'd cut it, and over the years I was like, what do I have all these things for, and what am I doing? Why am I collecting these? But also was thinking a little bit about obsessive collection of objects within Alaska at the time of contact, right? There was this like outpouring of native objects out of the state of Alaska and out of the United States and into collections that, we'll never get back here in the US because of NAGPRA. No foreign institution will let objects out because people claim them when they come back. So you have to go somewhere else to find them, right? And so I guess this was part of this like obsessive collecting pieces that I was in there, but eventually led me to this piece, like what am I doing with all these beards? And I was still in grad school at the time and applying for lots and lots of scholarships. And a number of the scholarships I was applying for were specific to Native or Alaska Native people, and so you had to prove your nativeness, and one way to do that is with your CIB card or the Certificate of Indian Blood, and so this is a document that the Bureau of Indian Affairs issues you. You carry it around with you, you have it, and it's just a strange thing to say, oh, I don't know, it's an odd thing when a nation starts tracking people's identity through blood. And usually hasn't end well. But anyway, so I've got this document, made this piece called 7/16, and kind of got me onto this whole other body of work that I ended up calling my blood work series. It was really about looking at how a body divided can move forward, or like having these piece of paper from the government telling you how much Indian you are, how much this you are. It's a very strange thing for somebody to grow up with, right? And so trying to create a whole self outside of the divided pieces in the blood. I do practice cultural arts, but if you look up my work, if you look up my name, you'll never see any of this out there. It's nothing that's in the commercial realm. These are things that I do for family, for tribe, but they do inform the work that I do now. So I do quite a bit of carving. We got great birch here in the interior, great material to work with, and so I was doing all these different mask forms, and I just love the mask form. It's just a great way of it's everybody can relate to a mask. It's a face. It's something you can identify with, look at, connect with. And I was doing all these different masks and thinking about different people I was working through. But then I was like, well, I don't really want to sell my masks because I feel like they're part of my cultural too, and don't particularly want to sell heritage necessarily. And then I was like, well, but then what am I making? What am I doing? So I was making this series that was called Performing the Masks, or Performing the Mask, and creating this group of work. I guess in the studio, I'm always got the radio on. It's just kind of in the background, usually listening to public radio, wherever the studio may be. And I guess as I was working and thinking about these forms, or this knife form that shows up over and over again in my work, the form comes from a warrior's tool. It's a knife for a warrior. It's not meant for hunting. In Tlingits, we were part of a warrior culture, and our nation was at war for a long time, and so this was my weapon of oil piece, and so it's sumped glass with motor oil floating in there. And something that was interesting that happened with this piece that, I guess I would have never realized or thought about in the making of the piece, was that somehow oil is so alluring that people cannot not touch it. Every time it was displayed, somebody would inevitably put their fingers into it, touch it, and then there'd be oil dripping around on the floors. Last time I showed at the Anchorage Museum, they put up a big old red rope all the way around it, so you couldn't physically get close to it. But what a great continual message it has, right? Like I drive cars, I fly planes, I got a boiler that uses heating oil, I've got oil in my hands, and it was just this great extension of the piece that we all have some oil on our hands, right? And so my weapon of oil piece. Every other year there's this event in Juneau, Alaska called Celebration, and we'd go back there every 2 years and participate. And if you've never been to Celebration, it should definitely be on your bucket list. It's about a 3 to 4 day event. They estimate about 9,000 people show up for it. You have to get your room a year in advance, or everything's sold out, or you're going to be staying on your friend's couch or something. But it's basically 3 or 4 days of dance performances going on. It was created by Sea Alaska Heritage Foundation in the 80s as a way to acknowledge that a number of the practices were only being done in a time of sorrow. So at a funeral or a kui, these practices would be done, but it was only being done, in grief. And so celebration was a way that you could do cultural practice without grieving. So anyway, every year we go back. First year my son was born. This was his first one. There's my mother there, and then Nathan Jackson, who culturally I identify him as uncle, but really he's my mom's first cousin. So however that works out, but I always kind of knew of him as uncle. And during celebration, inevitably we'd be invited up to dance with somebody's dance group. It was like, oh, your family, come on up, come dance. And so it was my son and my wife there, my little niece who runs a dance group and is a fluent speaker, and and I really never knew our songs, or I just got up and danced hard, so nobody could tell that I wasn't singing necessarily. But maybe, I guess it was something that was always influencing what I was doing. And so if we could move to the video. So just a few months after going to Celebration, his first celebration, my son fell in love with song and the drum, and this was he and my wife were out for a walk, and she was like, "This is amazing," and took this video just off there. So we can stop now on that one. But maybe really think about maybe responsibility to culture, or responsibility to a culture, or in representation, and really made me start thinking about how I represent culture within my own work, and maybe thinking a little bit about my responsibilities to that work. And so this is an exhibition from the Anchorage Museum. It was called Defining My Song. Luckily, I'd gotten a Rasmussen Fellowship for this, and was able to pour in money to the event. And those kinds of things are great for artists, because you're like, I need $3,000 worth of steel. I'm gonna go buy it. I need to ship 3,000 pounds of work to Anchorage. All right, got it. But I started doing these dagger forms again, and I've done a number of versions of these dagger forms, and so this was a set of daggers that had corresponding daggers that appeared to be sinking into the ground as others were raising out of the ground into the circle. And so as you came into the exhibition, this was the first part that you would see, and on those daggers were translations of Tlingit into English, and they're just kind of some of the phrases that we still use in our family. So this one, "I love you," "Iksehan," is one of those translations of those pieces. And so as you went through, you could see on one side some of the words we use, and then on the other side the English translation on there. And going to Celebration and seeing this revival of art and cultural practice that's really revolved, feels like through this song. I started thinking about where this work or where language was in our family line. And so my great-grandmother was our fluent speaker in our generational line. My grandmother, she'd always say she couldn't speak Tlingit, but if you asked her something really quickly, she could come up with a word. And so this image, as you walk through the space, as you're kind of coming to a representation of a clan house with myself and this bar of soap there. And the bar of soap is from my grandmother going through the aisle and seeing this soap and having a visceral reaction to it and going, I can still taste that soap. And it was the soap, the same brand that they used to wash her mouth out when she spoke Tlingit in school. And so it was kind of that generational line, or where it broke. And then as you move through the space, this was the interior section of this kind of symbolic longhouse in here, and the imagery could be seen on both planes as you're going through. And so in the center was this drum that was being played. It was a video projection of a drum being played, but there was no sound associated to it. And then on the final panel, or the other side of this longhouse or this space, was an image of celebration, where I was trying to capture that feeling of dance and celebration that was going on there, and the movement in the pieces in themselves. And so the last section of this installation, as we were moving through it, was a set of series of drums, and my son, he played through his first drum and broke the head and was replacing the head on his little drum, and was like, it's an interesting material, and so the piece has 20 images of my face in each drum, and as you start, there's one instance of a song playing, and then it goes quiet, and then 2 instances of the song playing and it going quiet, and then 4 instances, and by the end, all the drums are lit up and are playing, and it was a way for me to build into my practice a way to learn our songs. And so the song is a repetitive loop of the first canoe song, which is our song announcing when we're here, but also telling the story of our creation, of our specific clan. And so it was myself recording me trying to learn the songs over and over and over again. And I think there's about 100 different instances of the song being played at the end there. So jumping off from that one, moving into another group of work. This is a group of work that came about kind of haphazardly. The Anchorage Museum was doing an exhibition called Arctic Ambitions. It was Captain Cook, and it was about his journeys and the celebration of the discoverer. And my first thought, of course, is like, well, we weren't discovered. We knew we were here. I was talking with some friends about this exhibition. I was like, why are we doing another huge exhibition, and, about somebody outside Alaska or somebody that discovered Alaska. And the Anchorage Museum called me up and asked if I'd like to do a response to the exhibition. And I said, yes, I do. And I was thinking in the back of the mind, I was like, are you sure you want me to do that? But anyway, so this is the Captain Cook Monument, which is downtown. So it's about 7 blocks away from the museum where the exhibition is being held. And so it's a big monument to Captain Cook, looking out on Cook Inlet. And so I decided to do this piece where I'd bring out my daggers and surround them, kind of encapsulating or trapping this monument piece in there. And then throughout the day, I'd photograph and talk to people as they were coming through about the project and what's happening there. But I guess just kind of like being in the city, it was a time of being kind of invisible, like nobody was really there. The only 2 people that stopped and I talked with and was talking about the exhibition at the Anchorage Museum and what we're doing. I'm not sure if I communicated what I was doing quite well enough, because they were Australian and they were like, oh yeah, Captain Cook, he discovered us too. so it was kind of funny the way that happened. But oops, sorry, the clicker's getting a little bit. So this was the final piece, kind of throughout the day, and just these ghosts of people that were coming through the space as I was photographing myself. They actually printed this up and put it in the exhibition for the rest of the run of the exhibition. But it really got me going on this body of work. I was fortunate enough to do a Andy Warhol a social engagement residency at the Museum of Contemporary Native American Art in Santa Fe. And so, they called me up and they're like, hey, we've got this residency. We'd really like you to participate and do something. And I was like, well, I've got this project that was looking at monuments and thinking about, well, I started off with the one in Anchorage, but was really thinking about monuments and what public art says about a place or a community. And public art, it's these things that are supposed to represent all of us, right? That have a representation for everyone that is there. And so I was coming into this project thinking, well, what are these monuments that are here, and do they represent the communities or reflect the communities that they come from? And so that was kind of my basic thought on the piece. Put together a social media campaign. I was like, all right, I'm going to go do these things. I'm going to photograph. I'm going to invite people. I'll be there, this time of the day. I'd usually be there for the full day, at least 4 or 5 hours. And this one was way out of town, outside, north, probably 2 hours north of Santa Fe. But I wanted to do this one in particular because it has a history of being vandalized, because it is a monument to a conquistador whose big claim to fame was that he squashed the Indian uprising and cut off all the hands and feet of the men and threw it off to the cliff into this area. And so years ago, somebody cut the foot off of this statue. And so the director of the space there, he came out and stood with me on this one. But he was telling me, oh yeah, it's the statue with the man with 2 left feet, because they had to cast his left foot so they could get another replacement for it. But he was like, oh yeah, this thing's always been a problem. There's always somebody spray painting it or doing something or something with it. So it was on my top of my list for doing that piece. But here in right across the street from the museum there, a lot more people, a lot more traffic coming through, so I had lots of people to talk with. And it was interesting because it was, I felt like I did prepare myself a little bit more about what I was doing, what the project was about, and had a number of people that, just wanted to talk a little bit about what they were doing. Maybe ask me about Alaska. But almost everybody that stopped and talked ended up posing for the photograph. And then as part of the process, when I got back to Alaska, I printed out hundreds of these and sent out photographs to everybody that participated in the program. So I returned last summer? No, I had a half a year sabbatical, and so I had revisited all these spaces, and we're in the, in the Black Lives Matter movement, and looking at, I think as a nation, we are looking at monuments. And only one of these monuments were still standing when I went back and revisited the project. So I did go back and photograph these ones. And it's just interesting to see how times shift and go through. So this was my last solo exhibition, 2019, just before we didn't have exhibitions for a number of years. This was at the local gallery here in town, Well Street Art Company. Hopefully everybody's been there, and if not, next First Friday you should go in. And this was an exhibition I called SOS, and it was about looking at where we are as a state, within our climate, within our economics. And so these are pieces of baleen that are segmented off to illustrate Morse code. So it's ... ... It's a call for help, right? SOS, right? So we're looking at, as a state, as a world, how are we going to move forward, go on with these? So I had a number of the SOS pieces on there. And then I guess I always like to think of exhibitions as having chapters in them, and just like the previous one, as you move through, each one had its own chapter that I kind of was thinking about. And so this is my ivory knuckles piece. The call to action, like, hey, it's time to stand up. We need to move. We need to do something there. And then the final piece in there was titled Mend, and so it's a bowhead whale, jawbone, and kind of that kind of classic house frame that I enjoy using over and over again on there, because I think we definitely have to have, I guess my work always touches on maybe things that have that are hard to talk about sometimes, and maybe that's why I'm a visual artist. It's a way for me to process things in the world, and where my place in the world is, and what I'm doing in the world. But Mend, it's a way that I think, the arts have a way of bringing people together, and hopefully, I don't ever want to think that my work divides people, but that brings people together. So Mend, it was kind of the last piece in the exhibition, as a way of how do we move forward at this point in there. And then the pandemic happened, and I didn't do anything since then. So, Da-ka-xeen, thank you, thank you. So it looks like we got a few more minutes for questions. If anybody has questions, I don't want to say I didn't do anything. I haven't participated in large exhibitions. You know, I've been working in my studio, but just doing small things. I've started another project. It's in its infancy right now, and not really comfortable sharing those images yet, but we'll see where they go. Yeah, but.
All right, are there any questions for tonight's lecture? Okay.
Oh, I was thinking in terms of your, I don't know what you call them, the events that you've done with this public art, the monuments and things, and I was wondering if you've ever considered doing that with the piece down by the river downtown.
The downtown river. I was thinking about it. You know, as the, you know, this monument project. Well, the project I'm working on now is a little bit different, or it's about public lands really, or looking at public lands and those spaces. But the monuments, I almost felt like they've taken a life on their own now, and maybe my observation of them is past. But I do think it could be a great project to look at how these kinds of monuments, do they reflect all of us in our community? You know, in public art, it's always a tough one because you have to go through a committee. You know, but shouldn't the work reflect all of us? I don't know, but I've thought about it, but haven't really pursued it. Yeah.
Thank you for your expedition, and I would like to comment on one of your film clips concerning one of your projects in Oakland, if I'm not mistaken. It was the one where you had the house atop of the squares with the eggs. Mm-hmm. That's my philosophy. If you want to build something, build over what you've already built in the lower 48. Don't bring the building here, because we really don't need it. Because Alaska is wilderness, it's earthquakes, it's fire, it's volcanoes, it's permafrost, it's water. Don't bring construction here, because we really don't need it. We really don't. And that's all the lower 48 is building, development. If you want to build something, build over what you've already built. I like that expedition, I really do. It's a great explanation.
A little bit. I'm just curious about the Native Arts program. Can you talk a little bit about that? And like,
Sure. So the program was started in 1965 by Ronald Sanungatuk. He had this vision of elevating arts out of the knickknack stores, or indigenous arts of Alaska, out of the knickknack stores and into the museums. You know, it was kind of the vision. You know, and it was there before the art department or the art building. It was started with like 5 guys in a Quonset hut down by the power plant there, the bandsaw. And it was a program where Ron was able to go out and selectively recruit people to come onto campus and work together with him in an intensive, not only learning about the arts world, but kind of the business side of it, moving through there. And then students could take other classes if they wanted to, but it wasn't necessarily a requirement of the program. In 1985, the program, or when the art department was built, it moved in with them. Ron was the chair of the department until his retirement in '85. And interesting enough, it was only after retired, through the stewardship of Glenn Simpson, that it became part of the art department's degree program. So up until that point, you couldn't get a degree in Native Arts, but you could go there and learn about it. And so now it is part of the degree program. You can get a BFA with a concentration in Native Arts and a Master of Fine Arts with a concentration in Native Arts. Yeah, and so yeah, our student body, I think like all of the UA system, is people that haven't graduated from high school yet, people that I would call elders, taking the class. Yeah.
I wonder if you could comment about the progression going from individual objects into more conceptual things, where you have aggregates of things, because it increasingly gets rarefied in terms of people who can understand what that concept is. How do you bring people along, or do they have to already be at a certain place before they understand?
Yeah, great question. You know, I guess maybe I just keep moving forward. And maybe I should be a little bit more aware of an audience that is maybe outside of the art field, right? Like, you know, I definitely have studied art, went to multiple schools for it, you know, lots of art history. But I just kind of keep moving forward, and I guess I don't question if people get it or not. And maybe I should, but I just keep moving.
Questions?
I have some questions, just for fill in the blanks for my notes, if that's okay. Concerning the certificate for the government, it had Indian/TSIM, and that's all.
Yeah, so it was identified as, so I'm identified as Indian and Tsimshian. So, which really, Tsimshian, yeah. But really that's even a mistake, because it should be Tlingit and Nishka, which is my grandmother and grandfather's side. So grandmother Tlingit, my grandfather Nishka, which is just right on the other side of the Portland Canal. You know, he's
Okay, and one other question, or two other questions. John's surname in Idaho?
McConville.
McConville. And the celebration is held in which city here in Alaska?
Juneau. And it's off schedule now, so I'm not sure when they're going to do it because of the pandemic. It was canceled 2 years in a row, and then they had it, and so I don't know if they're going to do it again or if it's going to be another.
Okay, and there is
So I don't know.
last question, excuse me. Local arts company, your last local expedition was held where?
Oh, at the Well Street Art Company.
What was it again?
Well Street?
Will Street.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Here in Fairbanks.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Where is this?
Hey, Da-ka, thanks so much for the refresher on your work in the nearly 2 decades that I've known you, and specifically the 2 that we shared a studio space during the MFA program. I've been continuously inspired by the work that you make and create. And what I'm wondering now is, who inspires you? What artists, whether they're visual, interdisciplinary, or transdisciplinary artists that are working today, are inspirational to you?
Well, Nicholas Glannon is an artist out of Sitka. My wife jokes that he's my art bro. We seem to have been in a number of exhibitions together over the years, but he's somebody that just amazes me at what he does, the amount that he does, the quality of his work, and the commitment to the creative process. And then I'm constantly inspired by my students. I just am always inspired by I don't know, that fresh mind of thinking about whether it's a medium or a material that somebody starts to work with and manipulate and then moves forward, or an idea that somebody locks onto, and you know, those moments of seeing how somebody else formulates creativity is very inspiring to me.
All right, are there any more questions? All right, Da-ka-xeen, thank you so much for sharing your personal experience and, as it was so eloquently stated, your inspirational life work with us tonight. We'll get a round of applause for